They say Montana skies can make a person honest. When the world around you is that wide open, there's nowhere left to hide your lies. I used to think that was just something old folks said to sound poetic. Now I know it's true. Because standing here, 20 years after I swore I'd never come back, honesty is the only thing this land seems to ask for. My name's Hannah Mae Carter, and this ranch was once my whole world. 50 acres of rolling gold, one lean and red barn, and a porch swing that creaked like it was still trying to talk. It belonged to my grandfather, Henry Carter, the quietest man I ever loved. And the day I came back to bury him, I realized how much noise silence can make. I left Montana when I was 18, chasing something I couldn't name. Maybe freedom or proof that I was more than a girl who could mend fences and bake biscuits. Grandpa didn't say much the morning I left. He just handed me a paper bag with a sandwich, two $20 bills, and a folded note I wasn't allowed to open until I got to wherever I was going. I didn't open it for years. He never said, "Don't go." He never said, "I'm proud of you." He just said, "The gate's always open." That was 20 years ago. And somehow I thought he'd always be here, sitting in his rocker, boots dusty, hat tipped low, watching the world move slower than his heart. But time doesn't care about our assumptions. It just keeps riding forward. When the call came, I was in Denver, halfway through a life that didn't fit. A marketing job, an apartment full of quiet that didn't feel like peace, and a heart that kept circling the same regrets. The voice on the phone belonged to Mara, my cousin. She said, "He's gone, Hannah. He went in his sleep. Didn't say a word." Of course he didn't. Grandpa never needed to. She asked if I'd come for the funeral, and before I could think, I said yes. Because no matter how far you run, some goodbyes are carved into your bones. I drove home that weekend, 10 hours through mountains that felt older than God. The closer I got, the smaller the world became, from highways to dirt roads, from city noise to coyote calls. When I saw the first Carter Ranch sign, the air caught in my chest. The fields looked the same, endless, soft, forgiving. But the house, it looked tired, like it had been waiting too long. The paint had faded, the porch sagged a little, but the old windmill still turned slow and sure. And there, hanging from the porch beam, was the same creak and swing, empty now. Inside, the house smelled like cedar and dust and a life well lived. His hat still hung on the wall. His boots still lined up by the door, one slightly ahead of the other, like he'd be back any second. The kitchen table was set for one, coffee cup half full, newspaper folded, the morning he never finished. I touched the mug, still faintly stained from his last sip, and whispered, "You could have waited for me, old man." Silence answered back, but somehow I swear it sounded kind. The funeral was small, just a handful of faces I hadn't seen since high school, ranchers, church ladies, old friends with weathered hands and soft eyes. We gathered under a wide sky that looked too blue to hold grief. When the preacher asked if anyone wanted to say a few words, nobody moved. Then I stood up. My voice shook, but I spoke anyway. I used to think Grandpa's silence meant he didn't have much to say, but I realize now it meant he'd already said enough, just not with words. A few people nodded. Someone sniffled.
And then, as if on cue, the wind picked up. Not hard, just enough to rustle the grass and bend the wildflowers. That was Henry Carter for you, always talking through the weather. After everyone left, I stayed behind, just me and the empty field. The mountains stared down like they were listening. And that's when I heard it. The low, steady creak of the windmill spinning, the same rhythm I grew up falling asleep to. It sounded like breathing, like the land itself remembering him. I looked down at my hands, city soft now, not the calloused ones he taught to hold a rope steady. And I felt it, deep and quiet. Guilt for leaving, for staying gone, for assuming he didn't need me when maybe he did. That night, I stayed in the old guest room, the one that smelled like rain-soaked hay and lavender sachets. The walls were covered with framed photos, rodeos, family picnics, snow-covered fences, and in every one of them, he was there. Never in the center, always at the edge, smiling like he knew something the rest of us didn't. I couldn't sleep, so I wandered into the barn. The air was cold and sweet with hay. His old tools hung neatly on the wall, labels written in his handwriting. And there, nailed to the beam, was a dusty envelope. In faded ink, it read, "For Hannah Mae." I pulled it down, heart thudding like hoofbeats. Inside was a single piece of paper, creased and yellowing, but clear as day. "If you're reading this, I'm gone. Don't cry too long. There's work to be done. Check the west pasture come sunrise. You'll find what you're looking for there." No signature, no explanation. Just that, practical as a prayer. I stood there for a long time, staring at the paper. The west pasture was his favorite place, where he used to take me as a kid to teach me the language of the land. He said the earth doesn't talk, but it listens. And if you're patient enough, it answers. So I waited for dawn. The next morning, mist curled low across the fields. I drove the old truck down the dirt path, the one lined with cottonwoods, their leaves whispering like they knew secrets. The pasture stretched wide and gold, endless as memory. And there, near the fence line, stood a single tree. Grandpa had planted it years ago, a lone aspen in a sea of grass. Its trunk was carved with something new. Fresh, clean lines cutting into old bark. I walked closer, heart pounding. And there, carved by his steady hand, were 5 words. "Don't speak it, live it." I touched the bark, tracing the letters. It was his handwriting. I'd know it anywhere. The same steady, square print he used on every feed bucket, every tool handle. And that's when I realized that was the lesson. The one he'd been teaching me all along. You don't need to say the truth. You need to live it. I sat beneath the aspen, the grass damp beneath my palms, the horizon endless before me. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full. And for the first time in years, I let myself cry. Not for loss, but for understanding. Because in that quiet morning, I finally heard what he'd been saying my whole life, that some love doesn't speak, it shows up, it stays steady, it waits. When I drove back to the house, I noticed something else, the porch swing. It was still moving, not from the wind, but just enough to creak once, softly, like a nod, like a goodbye that didn't need words. Tell me in the comments, have you ever learned something important from someone who never said much? Tap the heart if silence has ever taught you more than words. What do you think he left for her in that pasture? Have you ever returned to a place that remembered you better than people did?
Morning came soft over the Carter ranch, the kind of dawn that feels hand-stitched, one thread of gold at a time pulling through the dark. The air smelled of wet grass and old earth. I stood on the porch with coffee in my grandfather's chipped enamel mug, staring toward the west pasture. The words carved in that aspen hadn't left my mind all night. Don't speak it, live it. They were simple words, but the older I got, the more I knew that simple things in Montana usually carried weight. Rivers look calm until you wade in. Mountains look still until the wind shifts. And a man like Henry Carter, he could say a lifetime in one line. The next few days, I wandered the ranch like I was walking through an old dream. The barn smelled of oil and hay. The corral sat empty, fence lines sagging but proud. Everywhere I looked, there were pieces of him. The way the tools were hung by size, the coffee tin full of nails labeled "still good," and the radio beside his rocker frozen on the country station he loved. It hit me how much of him had existed quietly in the in-between spaces. He'd never been a storyteller. He was the story. And now it was on me to finish reading it. That afternoon, I drove into town, Bitter Creek, population just shy of 2,000, give or take a wedding or a funeral. The diner on Main Street hadn't changed since high school. Red vinyl booths, coffee that could clean a carburetor, and the same waitress who used to call everyone sweetheart. She spited me right away. "Well, I'll be darned. Hannah Mae Carter. Thought city life swallowed you whole." "Not yet," I said, smiling. "You here for Henry?" "Yeah, settling things." Her face softened. He was the kind that left more behind than he ever took. I nodded. "He left me a message." "Course he did," she said, pouring coffee. "Henry talked best with his hands, built fences instead of speeches." I told her about the carving, about the letter, about the west pasture. She leaned close, lowering her voice. "You know what's out past that aspen, don't you?" I shook my head. "It's Old North Creek," she said. "Used to run all the way through before it dried up. Your granddad built a small shed near there back in '82. Always said he was keeping something safe. Never told nobody what." A shed? Something safe. My pulse quickened. By late afternoon, clouds had gathered over the mountains, the kind that carried both thunder and memories. I loaded the old truck with gas, gloves, and a lantern, then drove toward the creek road, if you could still call it a road. Tall grass brushed the fenders, and every bump felt like time trying to shake me off. The shed appeared like a ghost between cottonwoods, weather-gray boards, roof half caved in, padlock rusted but intact. I climbed out, heart in my throat, and pulled the old bolt cutters I'd found in the barn. The lock snapped clean. Inside, dust floated in narrow beams of light. There were no tools, no hay bales, no signs of livestock, just a wooden chest, smaller than the one in the house, and an old chair. On the chest sat a notebook, its cover cracked and leather soft as worn boots. I brushed it off, sat down, and opened to the first page. It wasn't his handwriting, not at first. The first entry read, "Summer 63. Henry says if I can't tell the truth out loud, I can at least put it on paper. Ruth Carter. Ruth Carter. My grandmother. She'd passed before I was born. Mama used to say she went early from a weak heart, but we never talked about it much." I flipped through the pages, her writing steady at first, then smaller, like the years were tightening around her. She wrote about the ranch, the drought years, the loneliness. Then, halfway through, her words changed, fuller, braver. Henry doesn't say much, but when the sky breaks open, he listens to it like church. He fixed the fence today, and said, "Everything that's worth keeping has to be mended now and again." I think he was talking about me. I smiled through tears. Even then, he was teaching without speaking. Toward the back, her entry stopped. The last one was dated August 1975. If Hannah ever reads this, tell her that quiet people love loud. They just do it steady. My breath caught. She'd written my name. But I wasn't born until 1981, 6 years later. I flipped the page, and there, in my grandfather's blocky handwriting, were new entries years later. Short notes like prayers. Planted Ruth's tree by the creek today. Taught Hannah to ride. She laughs like her grandmother. Don't let her leave thinking silence means nothing. I shut the notebook, tears streaking my dusty cheeks. The lesson wasn't just his. It had started with her. He'd carried her voice all those years in his own quiet way, waiting for me to hear it. I stayed in that shed until dusk. The wind picking up outside, lightning walking the ridge line. Before I left, I noticed a small box tucked beneath the chair. Inside were Polaroids. My mother as a child, my grandparents smiling beside a young chestnut mare, a baby calf in Grandpa's arms, and tucked behind them a folded note in his unmistakable handwriting. Hannah Mae, don't look for me in words, look for me in the work. Feed the land and it'll feed you. Keep quiet long enough and it'll tell you what you're worth. I held that note to my chest as thunder cracked overhead. Outside, rain began to fall, steady, deliberate, washing the dust from everything it touched. By the time I reached the house, the world smelt like mud and lightning. I made a fire, brewed coffee, and opened the window so the rain's rhythm could keep me company. For the first time, the silence didn't ache. It breathed. The next morning, the air was clear, rinsed clean by the storm. I drove back to town and stopped by the feed store to return the favor to Earl, one of Grandpa's oldest friends. When I told him about the shed, he chuckled. Figured you'd find that eventually. Old Henry asked me to keep it quiet. Said it was his school for the ones who'll come after. School? I asked. Yeah. He used to take the neighbor kids there, show 'em how to mend things, fences, saddles, themselves. Said nobody should leave this world without knowing how to fix what's broken. I laughed softly. Guess I was one of his students after all. Earl grinned. Still are. That evening, I drove back to the west pasture one last time. The aspen shimmered in the breeze, its leaves flashing silver in the sun. At its base, the grass had grown greener than the rest of the field, rainwater pooling where the roots had thickened. I placed the notebook there, resting it against the trunk. The wind turned the pages by itself, stopping on one of my grandfather's notes. If you learn to listen, the land will always answer back. I whispered, I hear you. And I meant it.
It's funny, when people talk about coming home, they always describe the smell. The coffee on the stove, the cut grass,
the air before a storm. But for me, coming home sounded like something. It sounded like wind through the cottonwoods, like the screen door creaking open for no reason, like the low, steady hum of a land that finally decided to speak again. Since finding the notebook and that letter, I hadn't been able to shake the feeling that my grandfather had planned all this, the carving, the shed, even the timing of it all. Maybe he knew it would take me this long to understand that silence isn't absence, it's preparation. I decided to stay. At first, it was just for the summer, to sort things out, as I told my boss over the phone. But the land had other plans for me. Each morning, I woke with the sunrise painting the fields gold and felt something inside me stretching back into shape. The city had made me small, fast talking, overthinking, all motion and no meaning. Here, everything moves slow enough for my thoughts to catch up. The first thing I did was fix the fences. Most people would have called someone else, but I remembered how Grandpa used to do it. One wire at a time, patience in every pull. I found his old gloves hanging by the door and slipped them on. They were stiff and cracked, but still fit. By noon, my arms ached and my hair stuck to my neck, but I couldn't stop smiling. It wasn't just a fence I was mending, it was everything between us. I could almost hear him beside me, grunting approval the way he used to. Not a full sentence, just that low sound that said, "Keep going, kid." A few days later, I found a folded map tucked into the back of his truck's glove box. Faint pencil lines marked different sections of the ranch, each labeled with one word: teach, rest, forgive, grow. The west pasture, the one with the aspen tree, was marked listen. It hit me then that the ranch wasn't just land to him, it was a lesson plan. Every field had a purpose, every fence line a metaphor. He'd been writing sermons in dirt and weather, and I was finally fluent enough to read them. When the neighbors heard I was staying, they started showing up, one by one, like homing birds. Old Mr. Hendricks dropped by with a jar of honey and said, "Your granddad used to trade me eggs for this. Best man I ever knew. Never said more than 10 words, but every one of 'em counted." Mara, my cousin, helped me clean out the barn. We found an old photo nailed to the beam. Grandpa holding a rope, teaching a boy to lasso. On the back, he'd written, "You don't learn by talking." She looked at me and said, "He really believed that, didn't he?" I said, "More than anything." One afternoon, I was sitting on the porch when the mail truck came rattling up the drive. The driver handed me a package wrapped in brown paper. No return address, just my name written in his handwriting. Inside was a small wooden box, hand-carved, the lid etched with the same 5 words as the aspen tree. Don't speak it, live it. When I lifted the lid, I found a silver pocket watch. On the inside of the cover was engraved, "For when time feels too quiet." I turned it over in my hands, tears warming the metal. It didn't tick, but maybe it wasn't supposed to.
As the days passed, the ranch began to change. Or maybe it was me. The grass grew thicker where I'd repaired the irrigation lines. The horses grew calmer, less skittish. Even the air felt different, like the land was exhaling after holding its breath for too long. Every evening, I'd walk out to the west pasture, sit under the aspen, and talk. Not out loud, but inside my chest, where he'd always listened best. Sometimes I'd ask for advice. Sometimes I just sat there, waiting for the wind to move through the leaves, pretending that was his reply. One night, the sky cracked open with a storm that shook the hills. Lightning flashed across the valley, bright enough to turn the fields into oceans. I ran to the barn to check the animals, soaked through before I got halfway there. Inside, the horses stamped and snorted, but they weren't panicking. It was almost like they knew I'd come. I calmed them one by one, whispering, "You're all right, you're all right." The rain hammered the roof, the thunder rolled, and for a brief second, I felt exactly what he must have felt 100 times. Small, but steady. That's when I understood the real meaning of his silence. It wasn't about avoiding words. It was about making space for everything that couldn't be said. After the storm, I found myself walking toward the shed again. The ground was soft, the air full of that rich, clean smell that only comes after rain. I opened the door and sat in the same chair he used to use, notebook in my lap. For the first time, I wrote something of my own. "You taught me that talking isn't the same as telling, and that some lessons don't echo until we're ready to hear them. I'm listening now." I left the notebook open on the table, pages fluttering in the breeze. It felt like starting a conversation we'd finish someday. The next morning, I called my boss in Denver. He asked, "So, when are you coming back?" I looked out over the fields, the sunrise painting the horizon, pink and gold. "I'm not," I said. "This place still has something to teach me." He paused, then said, "You sound happy." I said softly, "Not happy. Home." By late summer, I'd restored most of the ranch. The fences stood straight, the barn roof patched, the porch swing reinforced. One evening, Mara stopped by and said, "You've done more in a few months than anyone expected." I smiled. He left me instructions, just not on paper. She tilted her head. "You know, Hannah, I think you finally figured him out." Maybe. Or maybe I finally stopped trying to. A week later, I got a call from the local high school. They were reviving the old agricultural program, and the teacher, a friend of my grandfather's, asked if I'd come talk to the students about ranch life. I laughed. "You sure you want me? I don't have much to say." He chuckled. "Then you'll fit right in with Henry Carter." So I went. I told them about the West pasture, the shed, the notebooks, about how silence doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care enough to listen. One of the kids asked, "Did he ever tell you he loved you?" I smiled. "Every day. He just didn't need words to do it." When I got home that evening, the sky was clear, the stars sharp as nails. I walked to the aspen tree and hung the pocket watch from a branch right above the carving. The moonlight caught the silver, making it glint like a heartbeat. Then I said the only thing left to say. "Thank you, Grandpa, for teaching me how to hear." The wind rose just then, rustling the leaves in reply. A whisper that sounded like home. Autumn came slow that year, as if Montana itself didn't want to let go of summer. The mornings turned crisp, the fields burned gold, and the mountains wore the first dusting of snow like they were saving it for someone special. Every morning I'd wake to the same quiet, that perfect kind of silence that feels like prayer before the world stirs. The ranch was alive again, and so was I. The days fell into a rhythm, steady as breath. Feed the horses, check the fences, coffee at sunrise, soup at dusk. Each chore became a kind of meditation. Every sound, boots on wood, gates creaking, wind and grass, felt like language now. I used to need words to feel seen. Now I understood what my grandfather had always known. Presence was its own kind of conversation. Some evenings I'd sit on the porch swing, watching the light fade and think about the long line of Carters who lived and loved on this land. None of them left monuments or money behind. Just lessons. Quiet, steady lessons, taught by example, passed through soil and time. Winter arrived early that year, a silver hush that covered everything in forgiveness. The first snow came heavy, blanketing the fields until even the fences disappeared. I remember standing at the window, coffee mug in hand, watching flakes drift past the glass and thinking, this was exactly how peace looked. It didn't announce itself. It just showed up and stayed a while. In January, I started keeping a notebook of my own, same leather kind as his. I filled it with things I'd learned, small truths that came to me while mending a latch or brushing a horse. Some things don't need fixing. They just need tending. People and pastures grow better when they're not rushed. A quiet life is not an empty one. Sometimes I'd imagine him reading those words over my shoulder, grinning that half grin of approval. I still talk to him, though not out loud, just enough to keep the silence honest. By March, the snow began to melt, trickling down the hills into the old creek bed behind the shed. The sound of water returning felt like something inside me thawing too. I walked out there one morning and found that the aspen tree, the one with the carved message, had new buds sprouting along its branches. Even after the cold, it was alive. I rested my hand on the bark, tracing the carved words. Don't speak it. Live it. And for the first time, I felt what they meant. Not a command, a blessing. Living, to him, had always been about showing up for the world, quietly, consistently, without fanfare. It was the work of hands, not tongues. And somehow, it was enough. Spring in Montana is a slow resurrection. The snow recedes, the rivers swell, the earth stretches itself awake. The horses kick and run like they're remembering what freedom feels like. And the sky, that endless Montana sky, turns a blue so wide, it feels like forgiveness itself. I started planting again. Wildflowers first, then tomatoes, then a patch of sunflowers by the barn. My grandfather had always said, plant something that'll look back at you. And every morning when I walked past those sunflowers, I swore they were nodding the way he used to. One evening, Mara came by with her 2 boys. They ran around the yard, chasing the dog, laughing loud enough to fill every corner of the old house. Mara sat beside me on the porch, sipping lemonade. "You ever think you'd end up back here?" she asked. "Not in a million years," I said. "But now I can't imagine leaving." She smiled. "You sound like him." "Guess I finally learned how to listen," I said. The sun dipped low, staining the horizon orange and pink. The windmill turned slow and steady. We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to. Some silences feel full. That night, I went through one of Grandpa's old drawers and found a small cassette tape labeled "For Hannah." when she's ready. I didn't even know he owned a recorder. I dusted off the old player, slid the tape in, and pressed play. At first, just static. Then his voice, low, rough, like gravel wrapped in honey. "Hey there, kid. If you're hearing this, I'm probably long gone, and you're probably sitting there wondering if I ever had much to say. Truth is, I said it all the best way I knew how, with my hands. Every fence I fixed, every saddle I mended, that was me talking. But I reckon you already figured that out. Don't worry about what you didn't say to me. I heard you every time you came home, even when you didn't. Just promise me one thing. Keep the land breathing. And when it gets too quiet, remember, silence isn't empty. It's full of everything that matters." The tape clicked off, and for a long time, I just sat there, tears rolling down my cheeks, smiling like a fool. He had spoken, not to teach, but to confirm what I already knew. When summer rolled back around, the ranch held its first community picnic in years. We grilled, played music, kids rode the horses, and old-timers swapped stories that stretched the truth but healed the heart. Before sunset, I stood up to say a few words. Not much, just enough. I used to think this ranch was just dirt and fences. Now I know it's a voice, and it's still talking through all of us who remember how to listen. The crowd clapped, but I swear, in the soft breeze that followed, I heard his laughter, low and proud. That night, after everyone left, I walked down to the aspen one last time. The air was still warm, the stars sharp and countless. I sat beneath its branches and closed my eyes. Somewhere nearby, an owl called once, then again, slow, deliberate. And I thought about how, in the end, my grandfather's greatest gift wasn't the land or the lessons. It was space, the kind that lets you grow into your own voice. I whispered to the wind, "I'll keep it breathing, Grandpa." The leaves rustled softly in reply. Now every morning when I wake, I make coffee in that same enamel mug. I walk out to the porch, listen to the wind move through the fields and smile. There's always work to be done, and I'm finally ready to live it. Because I understand now, words fade, silence stays, and love, real love, doesn't need to be said to be heard. I used to think stories were told with voices. Now I know they're written in the things we do over and over again, the chores, the care, the quiet tending of what we love. That's where truth hides. That's where legacy breathes. And sometimes the people who say the least teach us the most. Because when words fall away, what's left is presence, and presence never dies. Because here on True Life Stories, we don't just tell stories, we remember them. Subscribe, stay with us, and help the silence end, one true story at a time.